There is something sinister about the coastline of the British Isles, which stretches for some 7,000 miles. It's home to grand hotels and picturesque promenades. On the surface, there are bright lights and funfairs, sandy beaches and beautiful sunsets. But dig a little deeper in the sand and you uncover an underworld of murder and mayhem. In Coastal Killers, we take a journey to the cliff's edge, where the land meets the sea and life meets death. A shoreline that is awash with tales of death and depravity. These are the chilling true stories of Britain's worst coastal killers. It was a crime that defied reason. The murders of twin brothers by their best friend. Today we're in North Wales to look at how a holiday 40 years ago went tragically and inexplicably wrong.
The murder of Mark and Michael Otter is one of those inexpressibly sad cases.
This is particularly sad and particularly difficult to understand, featuring, three very close friends.
They were handsome fellows, really the world at their feet, really, 18 years old, looking forward to life, and it was all cut short.
What's so fascinating about the case is that everybody seems to imply that the three of them got on extremely well, the great mates, they were going out, there was nothing, no hostility between them or anything else.
That's the tragedy of it, that there weren't any signs, that there weren't any indications of anything suspicious or anything that could have caused somebody worry or concern.
It's the story of two families torn apart and somehow yet brought together by murder.
Even today, 40 years after the murders happened, we still don't know exactly why the deaths occurred.
Trasvaneth is a small village, a small community beside a huge lake in the Snowdonia National Park. It's literally where the mountains sweep down past the lake and onto the sea.
The Snowdonia area of North Wales was particularly popular in the early 80s for people from the northwest of England to kind of pop across on holiday. So there would have been lots of little holiday campsites, caravan sites, where people could go across from Liverpool or from more built-up parts of the Wirral over to get kind of a quick and easy holiday somewhere beautiful.
It was a very rural, traditional, Welsh-speaking area with lots of people who were working as farmers or working on the land. But on the other hand, in the early 80s, it had right by Trawsfynydd a large lake and a nuclear power station, which was operating in 1982. It doesn't operate now, but it did at that time.
The sea on one side, the mountains on the other, a beautiful lake, and this stark nuclear power station. And this is also the location for an unspeakable tragedy.
Michael and Mark Otter were twin brothers, 18 years of age. They lived with their parents in the Liverpool area, Birkenhead area of Liverpool. And every holiday period, they would visit a caravan park in Trawsfynydd, North Wales, near the Trawsfynydd Lake, in fact. The boys were described as very happy, outgoing lads, enjoyed school, enjoyed the outdoor life, etc.
They came from and lived with a happy, close-knit family. Their mother, Diane, their father, Stanley, and they had 2 sisters. Mark was still at school. He was studying for his A-levels. Michael was at Birkenhead Technical College. At Easter 1982, the Otters set off to go down to their caravan.
And they were later joined by another friend of theirs, James McElroy, and James was a friend from their school days.
They'd been friends with James McElroy since they were 7 years old. So they'd known each other for 11 years. They were close friends, and their parents had also become friends as a result of their children's friendship. So it's a very close-knit relationship between these 2 families, the Otters and the McElroys.
The 3 boys were inseparable. The Otter brothers, the Otter twins, thought of James as like a brother, and they went everywhere together.
He was described as a happy, outgoing lad, no issues whatsoever. Great fan of the outdoor life, of nature, etc. Going for walks up the mountainside, camping, all this type of thing.
And that Easter weekend, he hitchhiked down from Birkenhead to the caravan park to join the twins for the weekend.
You don't see hitchhikers nowadays, but go back 40 years ago, it was common for a lot of people to hitchhike, and I would imagine he would have got lifts easy enough.
For young people, it gave you that taste of independence, of independent travel on the cheap. And so James McElroy didn't go with the Otters. He decided to hitchhike separately and meet them at the campsite.
He had with him a shotgun. It was described as a single barrel pump action 12-bore shotgun, and it was in fact brand new. He'd only recently purchased it about a week before going to the camp for the sum of £118. And the term that was used was, it was gleaming, it was brand new.
He hitchhiked all the way down from Birkenhead with a shotgun, presumably not loaded. He takes it round, he shows people know he's got a shotgun. Mark and Michael's parents know they're going out with a boy 18 with a shotgun.
No questions were raised. It didn't seem anything strange. It was just, it's something new that he wants to try with the boys. There seems to have been no concerns raised about why he'd brought this gun or whether this was something that they should really be doing.
Mark and Michael had planned to go out hunting rabbits. It's a common thing for them to do. Their family knew that they would go out up the hillside, up the mountainside in search of rabbits to kill, which they would bring back to cook for supper.
James apparently approached the local farmer and asked permission to go onto his land to shoot rabbits, which the farmer readily granted.
There wasn't any issue of any falling out. They were quite happy together. They left quite peacefully, and off they went to shoot rabbits.
And this was perfectly normal. They were 18 years old. They had that kind of degree of independence from their families. What the parents didn't know was that the boys would never be coming home again.
While they were out, Mark and Michael's father, Stanley, heard shots. Now, he didn't think anything of this. Sport shooting was quite common around the caravan park, and the boys had gone out to hunt rabbits. But when Mark and Michael didn't return at supper time, he began to get worried, and that worry grew and grew as they didn't return that night.
The Otter family faced this awful kind of period overnight when the boys hadn't come back, when they had to have supper without them. They spent the night not knowing what had happened until in the morning they were able to go out looking for them.
In the morning, their boys didn't return, and with the aid of the mountain rescue team and one of his colleagues in the campsite, a friend, they went to search for the boys.
As he made his way up the hillside, Stanley saw Michael lying on the grass. And at first he thought his son was asleep, but as he got closer and as he looked, he saw gunshot wounds in his son's chest and head, and he realised that Michael was dead.
He then discovered his second son, and his second son had gone down a bank and he had been killed. It appeared that he had been shot a number of times.
Mark too had been shot at close range, and such close range that it was obvious from the wounds that he had put his hands up to try and protect his face.
The Otter's father, discovering his children had been killed, would have been extremely shocking. It would have had a massive impact.
I think we can all put ourselves in the position of Mr. Otter, of finding your children dead and you unable to have helped, or unable to have stopped that situation. And the fact that he'd actually heard the shotgun being fired but hadn't realised what it denoted, you know, it just makes you shudder.
In the North Wales village of Trawsfynydd, the father of twin brothers Mark and David Otter was out searching for his missing sons. His search would end with him finding his boys, both dead from gunshot wounds. However, their friend James McElroy, the owner of the shotgun, was nowhere to be seen.
Police and mountain rescue teams were called out, and they began a painstaking search to try and find the killer or the weapon or both. And the first thing they found was a trail of shotgun cartridges leading up the hillside. And about half a mile beyond the bodies of Mark and Michael Otter, they came across the body of the killer.
McElroy was lying among some rocks, and in the rocks there was the shotgun, which was propped in a vertical position with the stock wedged by the boy's jacket, holding it in position with the rocks, so that the butt of the gun was held in this jacket in the claw of two rocks.
It appeared that he'd killed himself, discharging the shotgun into his mouth.
It's interesting because James doesn't go on the run after the murders, but he does walk away from them. He doesn't shoot himself immediately. He carries on walking some distance away as though he can't face dying while looking at the bodies of the two boys that he's killed. He doesn't go and confess. He doesn't give himself up, but neither does he run away. He chooses a moment to sit down, set his gun up to face him, and then he shoots himself. It's an interesting conclusion because you never get that sense that he wants to kind of repent for what he's done or that he regrets what he's done. It's a very clearly thought out process. He knows what he's doing.
As you could imagine, given the circumstances of the incident, a police investigation took place, and a great deal of work was done into the background of all three boys, and particularly James. But no motive could be found. There was no explanation for why he had carried out this horrendous act.
Dr. Donald Waite was one of the country's leading forensic pathologists, assisting the police on hundreds of cases in a career that spanned 4 decades. This is the first time he has ever discussed the case, which remains among the most disturbing of his career.
I received a telephone call from the police asking me if I would drive down to Trawsfynydd. So I drove down and I saw a police motorcyclist along this road near Trowsfynydd, and he waved for me to turn, and as I turned he asked me to stop, and he said, "I won't charge you this time," but he said, "Your right indicator is not working." And he was serious, and I said, "Well, I'm just going to join your colleagues." He said, "Well, just make sure you get that indicator repaired as quickly as possible." So anyway, I drove down this road onto the side of Trowsfynydd Lake, and on this rocky area of very rough ground, rocks and grass, rough grass and weeds and brambles and so on. The police were waiting for me, and they said they'd found the bodies of 3 young men. I arrived and started to look at the Otter boys, and they had been shot multiple times. One had been shot in the face, but they'd also been shot in the legs and in the back from a distance of some 12 yards away, and then they'd both been shot in the face as they lay on the ground at close range by a shotgun. There were shotgun pellets, there were shotgun cartridges lying around. They'd been murdered by somebody with a shotgun.
To a certain extent, there is an element of overkill. Having shot Michael, he then went on and shot him in the face. He shot him in the back first, which suggests either he's come up behind him or Michael is running away. We could argue he was running away because we know that Mark was found further up the hill and clearly had run away from James. So it could well have been that he shot Michael first, Mark then runs away, and James is then feeling, well, having killed one, I better kill the other one. And I think it's quite clear that having killed Michael, he had to kill Mark.
The particularly hard part of this story is the fact that James at some point treats his 2 best friends as though they are the rabbits that he is hunting. And it is a hunt. He stalks them. He kills the first brother. Then when the second one runs away, he kind of follows him. He hunts him. He's hunting his prey. And it's almost as though in that moment, he's got a sense of power, a power that he doesn't feel in normal life, a sense of purpose. And it's a striking part of the story because it doesn't fit in with the brothers' friendship, this sense that the 3 of them are a unit. Suddenly, it is James chasing the other 2 and hunting them down and killing them in cold blood.
They'd been hunted and trying to escape. They'd been shot in different places, and then as they lay on the ground, whether dead or dying, severely wounded anyway, they had been executed.
James shot Michael at the back of the head. Michael was walking in front of him. He was about 6 foot, 8 foot in front of him. And again, inexplicably, for no reason, James shot him once to the back of the head. He fell to the ground, and of course Mark, who was a few yards in front, went into a state of total panic and began screaming and ran, and in fact tumbled down a small slope into a ravine.
He fell down the bank, and he was able to approach him close enough to shoot him in the arm when he was defending himself, and then in the face.
We had the overkill. Instead of just shooting him, he shot him several times, arms, legs, head, and clearly intended to kill him.
That description gives you some idea of James's intent. There's no question of anything apart from a desire and an intention to kill the boys.
So it's a very strange set of circumstances, how an individual who left with his friends on a morning out in the countryside, quite peacefully, quite happily, and that something then happened which led to these tragic circumstances.
think the fact that James shot Michael in the back first, before he outright killed him by shooting him in the head, was indicative that some progression had taken place. Either he had informed Michael that this was going to happen and Michael was running away, hence being shot in the back, or the moment just kind of like presented itself. Two boys looking away from him, he stood behind them, you know, he has this powerful weapon which kind of does urge people to use it, to actually, oh, you know, I could just do that. And maybe this was just an initial shot, basically, that had to be followed up because there was nowhere else for James to go. You cannot shoot your best friend in the back and then just hold your hands up and say, oh, I don't know why I did it. This, I think, propelled him forward into his plan, hunting down Mark and shooting him many times as he tried to defend himself, as he tried to run away, and then that decisive moment when he has to face his own death.
We went higher up the mountain, quarter of a mile away, and there was McElroy lying there. He'd shot himself through the forehead, really blown the top of his head off. Brain and skull and blood was in a track going away from the body, so you could see the line of destruction straight from him. So we knew that he shot himself. The other two boys had been shot, presumably by McElroy. There was no other weapon about, there was no other individual around. And the perplexing thing was that these boys were great friends.
How do you express a tragedy like that? How do you process that level of pain and grief?
How do you get on with your lives when you don't understand the biggest thing that has happened to you in that life? You don't get any sort of sense of closure. You're always going to be wondering about what exactly happened, what was the conversation that was going on that morning, was there any conversation, how did those boys feel, what was going on? There's so many unanswered questions.
The discovery of the boy's body sent a shockwave through the small, close-knit community, and work now began to try and unravel the mystery of why such a tragedy had unfolded. The murder-suicide of three teenage friends had left their families devastated, and the police had a loss to comprehend why such a tragedy had unfolded amongst three friends in the prime of their lives. For their part, all of the boys' parents were understandably inconsolable.
You can't possibly get over losing your children, and especially losing them in such horrific circumstances.
Such was the shock, in fact, of the incident that Stanley Otter and his wife, Diane, had to be hospitalised, suffering with trauma and shock for some days after.
It's devastating for a parent to have their child die at any age, in any condition. To have the child murdered must be even worse. And then to have a second child, a twin, murdered in such a brutal way, it must be horrendous for them. I don't think they had ever overcome the impact of that. And for the father to actually find his sons in that condition is unimaginable. The damage that's done him, the psychological damage, the post-traumatic trauma that he would have suffered for years. It's one of those images that would stay with him as much as he tried to forget he couldn't.
What's really interesting about this case is the fact that after the boys' deaths, the two sets of parents swore that this wasn't going to affect their friendship, that their friendship would continue, and offered sympathy towards each other for their losses. And I'm not quite sure a lot of us could do that, knowing that somebody's child has killed our children. That takes a certain person and a certain attitude to say, I acknowledge that those other parents are feeling as bad as we are, and to try and find some sort of unity in the face of such an awful shared experience.
Stanley said explicitly and clearly, this will not affect our friendship with the McElroy family. And James McElroy's mother said, and I think I found this incredibly poignant, she said, I grieve for losing my son, but I grieve for the Otters who have lost 2 sons.
It helps us understand the 3 teenagers in this story a bit better by seeing how their parents behaved after their deaths. That these were close families, they were friends, and they were determined not to be ruined by what had happened to them. Murder-suicides are really hard to understand, and they're very hard for anyone involved to get closure on, because you never get justice, you never get an explanation of why something happened. So how do you move on when you've got this awful event that can't be explained?
I used to find them in some ways frustrating, and I say that because you could never find an answer as to why people do certain things. When you have a motive, when you have a reason, it gives you some sort of professional investigative satisfaction, and certainly everyone, to know why someone has done something. What was the reason behind it? Whether it be the right reason or the wrong reason. There are cases where people commit these acts, very much like in the case of James McElroy, where there's never any explanation as to why. And they are such horrendous, dramatic actions. It makes one think, well, there must have been something dramatic that occurred, some event in their life. But when you investigate, very often you find nothing. And it's all about the mysteries of the human mind.
Murder-suicides are often pre-decided. These are situations where the suicide has been decided on already, which is often why some of the killings are so gross and seemingly inexplicable, is because it doesn't really matter if you're going to kill yourself, does it? You're not going to face these consequences. You're taking this exit, it's your decision. And in this case, this kind of one-sided suicide pact, where he's making a decision for the other 2 boys that they should not go through life and suffer it in the way that he imagined life was going to be as you got older. And he was doing them a favour, if you like, by taking them with him.
One of the interesting things that we find about murder-suicides is that they very rarely get any medical treatment. They're not known, unlike murderers who may be known, and certainly suicide cases are known to the mental health profession. Murder-suicides, very rarely are they known. And certainly it's very rare for them to have a criminal record. So again, there's no red flags because they're just unknown. I think one of the possibilities we've got to consider is the idea of them having a suicide pact. That was quite common in the 80s in different parts of Wales, for instance. In South Wales, there were whole villages where children started to get involved in suicide pacts. In this case, it's quite likely that he thought that he had a suicide pact with Michael and Mark. They may not have agreed with that, but he might have thought they did because they joked and laughed about it. And he could have been quite keen on the idea of suicide, but the 2 boys might not have been. The twins may have been joking about it, thinking he was joking about it.
In order to kind of explain why all of a sudden James would want to kill his best friends, you'd have to examine, his own personal way of looking at life and how he saw life. It's very difficult to imagine this as being, just kind of, as the police would put it, a murder-suicide. This was more of a one-sided suicide pact. At this point in time, James had already decided he was going to kill himself. And this kind of powerful weapon, which he now had in his hands, would make that so much easier.
18-year-old boys, there's an awful lot going on inside their heads that their parents aren't going to know about, that they keep themselves to themselves. 40 years ago, boys probably weren't encouraged to open up about their feelings and emotions. They were encouraged to keep them to themselves. And so there could have been all sorts of issues going on for James that he didn't feel he could open up about, that he dwelt on, that kind of he worried about until he felt that his worries were insurmountable. And he was so close to his two friends, maybe he felt that if I'm not going to live, then they're not going to live too. Perhaps the motivation for him was suicide, but he decided to take his friends with him.
Something must have happened. Either some long-standing dispute or argument, or something had gone on which resulted in him acting in the way that he did, or more mysteriously, more strangely, and maybe more frighteningly, that something had happened and that he had planned this.
Teenagers can worry about things that to us as older people seem trivial, but to them it takes on this huge importance. And I can believe that James was concerned about growing up, about impending responsibilities, about what his life was going to be like, and that he worried about not having a girlfriend or not having a healthy life, not being successful. And I think if you worry about things like that and you dwell on them in your mind and you can't really talk about them in any depth, those issues become magnified in your head until you can't see a way out, you can't see the point carrying on.
It's not uncommon for teenagers to harbour these dark thoughts of killing themselves or some grand outing from life and taking others with them. But actually carrying it out is fortunately very rare. It is a time of, as it were, Sturm und Drang, the idea that it's turmoil. It's this teenage thing where your brain is being reformatted to kind of take on the new environment and become an adult and launch yourself from the family home. That kind of process means that these kinds of things, these kinds of thoughts do occur amongst teenagers particularly. And you know, there is a fair number of teenagers that do commit suicide, but to take other people with you is fortunately very rare indeed.
It's possible that he genuinely took the shotgun intending to kill rabbits, and then his mental state got out of control suddenly and he killed the brothers on impulse. But it feels too planned. It feels as though he planned to kill them. He planned to take that shotgun with the purpose of killing all three of them. It feels as though there was a goal here, that was his goal all the way along. In that sense, it's even more frustrating that he didn't leave a note, he didn't explain himself, he didn't say why he had chosen this decision. But again, with the benefit of hindsight, it feels as though he knew all along this is what he was going to do.
The authorities hoped that the coroner's inquest into their deaths could put an end to public speculation and bring closure for the bereaved families. The deaths of the three teenagers saw a major inquest launched by the coroner. Certain to be central to the inquiry would be to understand how James McElroy had come to be in the possession of such a powerful weapon.
James's purchase of the shotgun that he brought with him on a holiday is interesting. Firstly, because it was expensive. You know, it was an expensive item to buy today at that price, but at that time, you know, that's a considerable investment for an 18-year-old.
How did James McElroy come to own a 12-bore pump-action shotgun? Now, granted, in 1982, laws governing the ownership of firearms were not as tight as they would become. But still, James Sr. had no idea his son had bought this shotgun, nor did he have any idea how James could have got the purchase price, £118, which is about £500 today, to buy the weapon.
It's a bit curious as to why he felt he had to spend so much money on this item that he claimed he just bought for rabbit shooting. There must have been other things they could have done that didn't require this expenditure. So looking back at it, obviously with the benefit of hindsight, you do wonder about James's motivations and the fact that he'd gone on this holiday ready, prepared to kill his friends.
preparation for presenting their own findings to the coroner, detectives spoke to all those who knew the boys well. And one piece of information in particular seemed to have some resonance. But could it just be attributed to teenage bravado?
During the course of the investigation into James's background, one interesting fact came to light, which might shed some light, or they thought may shed some light on explaining his actions. He apparently, some years before, when he was about 14 years of age apparently, was in discussion with a group of his pals, a group of lads, and they were talking about things in general in life. And James came out with a comment that he had a fear, a phobia about getting old, and that he didn't want to end up infirmed or disabled, or as he put it at that time, he didn't want to end up as a cripple. And this caused him some great concern.
McElroy had said that if he hadn't had a woman by the time he was 18, he was going to shoot himself. And he had also said he was going to shoot himself because he didn't want to grow old. He didn't want to be old and decrepit. And I think the family were aware of this peculiar thought that he had.
And that may have been a silly, jokey remark in the heat of the moment where he didn't mean anything to that remark at all. Or there may have been something more sinister, strange going on in his mind, which led him eventually to a situation where he had a shotgun and that he had an opportunity to shoot himself and shoot other people as well.
And he really did hold this belief, and his friends probably just dismissed it completely as the kind of usual "I don't want to live to get old" type rant that you often got with teenagers. But I think James was fairly serious, and he was fairly serious that if he hadn't had a girl by the time he was 18, that was it, he was going to give up on life.
James's father, James Sr., also gave evidence, and he described almost fragmentary conversations with his son in which James described and talked about dying young. And when he was asked about that, young James had talked about the bleak circumstances of the time and the hopelessness of the time.
That may have stayed with him, and it may have since that age grown in his mind to something which he needed to act upon. He may have become fixated by this. He may have decided that there was some degree of inevitability in what he was going to do, and that was the time he was going to do it. We don't know what was going through his mind. It may have been the spur of a moment, it may have been an argument, but it may have been something more sinister which was going on, which led inevitably to this shooting happening in this rural part of Wales.
It's not impossible that James actually tried to get Mark and Michael to agree to this suicide pact at the last minute, perhaps just presenting it of, hey, we don't want to live forever, we don't want to get old and cranky and lose our facilities and really sort of like crumble with age. Let's get out of it now while we're happy.
The closest to any form of formal public inquiry in this case was the inquest in May 1982 in Dolgellau. And that came to the obvious conclusion and returned the verdict that this had been a double murder followed by a suicide. But it couldn't quite answer the obvious question: why?
No explanation, no motive could be found. The verdict, as you expect, was that Michael and Mark had been murdered by James, and that James was a victim of his own actions, was a suicide.
James didn't leave a note, he didn't explain himself to anyone, so we're never going to know for sure what happened.
If we look at suicides, everybody assumes that they leave suicide notes, but quite a few people don't. In terms of murder-suicide, there's usually a purpose for doing it, and they often have long letters, reports, books, and everything else they write. The fact that he didn't have a suicide note raises the question, was it much more impulsive at the time? It may well have been that somebody sparked off a response in him that resulted in him losing his control, losing his temper, and shooting Michael. And that could have been a comment, it could have been a joke that went off, it could have been anything.
I don't think anyone will ever know the reason. McElroy's taken it to the grave with him. Whether he intended, whether he looked upon them as something outside his normal orbit, whether he suddenly got attracted to his new gun and he wanted to hunt them and look upon them as imagining himself, whether he'd been influenced by some television or some game. But that's what it appeared to me, that he decided to shoot his pals and kill them and then kill himself. The reasons will never be known.
They said he went out to get rabbits, shoot rabbits. Was there some mistake? Did he actually shoot Michael by mistake? I don't think so, because normally if you're going rabbit shooting, you take a very powerful torch with you. The whole idea is that you basically blind the rabbit and then shoot them. So I don't understand why he would made a mistake. I think it was much more intentional.
I find this case so sad, firstly because we don't know what exactly happened and we're probably never going to find out, but also the fact that these were three boys on the cusp of adulthood. They were 18 years old, they had their whole lives ahead of them. And you do wonder whether, if it had been today and if James had had people to talk to, people who recognised that boys do have all these emotions, all these worries, and he'd been able to talk about it, whether things might have been different.
Naturally, we want the crime to be followed by resolution and explanation and punishment. And what makes this case as difficult as it is tragic is that morality play could not unfold. There's the tragedy of the murder and the suicides, but there is no process, there is no judicial process which is gone through and which allows families and the public to process what has gone on. And there is no punishment because there is no killer left to punish.
And these three boys, their lives all cut short. For what reason? We will never know. It's so bizarre.
Today, 40 years after the murders of Michael and Mark Otter, we are no closer to finding out why they died. It is a timely reminder that not all crimes can be understood, however quickly they are solved.